I don't feel a need to either educate you, try to convince you to show up as I do. In the same way, I don't feel an urgency to completely distance myself from you. Again, like sort of going to my
Yes.
experience, like when I was 20, there was this urgency around like, oh, I can't be associated with Muslims because there are some Muslim terrorists and there are some people who say that all Muslims are terrorists. That I don't like in my body. If I feel like that sort of thing, like, oh, I can't be associated with you because of all of this going on, that's something for me to sit with because there comes it's more
Mm.
about something in me rather than what they're doing.
Okay, Camille, welcome back.
Yeah, glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you. So let's talk about why we're talking about this today.
Okay.
Uh, so I was in my house washing the dishes, and I was walking. It was after one of our events, and I was walking into my room to finish some work. And as I was walking, I got this memory of you talking about intent and impact. And I remember thinking, I love that, especially the way you taught it. You're like, it's good to understand it. Some people want to have accountability for the impact. Some people don't. This is what it is. And you just kind of laid it out in this really easy way. Now, this would be considered, I'm gonna use this word, old school DEI.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna, right? And so what's interesting is I've said before, and you know, I had a whole podcast on it, the more new, what fast food, as you would call it, DEI is, it's just not my cup of tea.
Mhm.
And your version is. And when I was walking, I was thinking of intent and impact and the way you've taught it. I thought, this is really sacred for Camille. Like, this is not a joke. This is not a fad. This is how she lives her life. And I was thinking about our interview about DEI and how you even came to it in that experience of wanting to advocate for the, you know, the marginalized Christians in the room at this moment, which you would never hear on the mainstream stage of that being an option. It's been so distilled. But this is not just about DEI. It's about a bunch of things. Because
Yeah.
I was walking, I was thinking, I heard these words in my mind. Those bitches appropriated us. And I was like, okay, first of all, who are those bitches? I don't even know. And I'm like, and what did they appropriate? And I started sitting with it and I was like, I was thinking to myself, I'm like, oh, the decolonizing, the queer ideology, which, and I was thinking of all these things I've been like slowly pulling myself back from
Yeah.
because I don't like the modern associations. And then I sent you an email and you're like, send me your list of things. And we're like, let's do a podcast about it.
Yeah.
So where do we begin?
Oh, where to begin? So, yeah. So I'll say like some of my words are DEI, woke, and liberal. Um, those words have become I'll say it's not a word I like to use a lot, but I'll say it. They have become weaponized by people on, again, another term I don't like, on both sides. So both those who are proponents and those who are for it. Um, and what I have found with these words, again, by those who are for or against, you don't actually know what you're talking about.
Oh,
That's the
God.
that's the wrong word for the thing you mean. Like even when we're talking about intent and impact, like a nuance is that there are going to be some DEI practitioners who teach intent versus impact, which again isn't bad, but then it can take another step where it's prioritizing, where depending on who you talk to, maybe a DEI practitioner, the only thing that matters is impact. And then opponents of DEI are going to say, well, the only thing that matters is intent. The way I teach it, and for me, what inclusion is understanding both. Can I have awareness of my or someone else's intent? And can I also have awareness of my or someone else's impact and hold both of those? But when you start weaponizing certain terms, it gets pulled into these binaries and you lose what the thing actually is. I'll pause there.
Well, just I think it's good to start kind of put a little pin in that because the theme for me speaking about all this to you is you and I together unraveling this publicly. how we relate to these things, what they mean to us, and how we feel like the meaning has been changed.
Yeah.
And that's kind of there's this interesting thing. I think most people listening can relate on some level. Some people might relate to it if they lived in a neighborhood that's become gentrified, like something changed in the culture of the neighborhood, or something that was sacred to them became a style or a trend. Like there's many ways, or a phrase goes into a song and everyone's using it, but they don't know where it started.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like a cultural norm, and it's also, I mean, we can even argue it's almost inherent and necessary to life. Like life is constantly evolving and recreating things.
Yeah.
And it's, I guess what I want to unpack with you is why it bothers me. You know, because
I
there's
love that question because that's my question for you. Why does it bother you? Like,
because
and I say that just because of my own sort of exploration around terms and then how the general public uses them and then how that impacts how I choose to use it. So even outside of the terms that I just talked about, liberal, woke, DEI, what has really sort of informed my identification or ways in which I identify was my process of coming to identify as Muslim. So for a long time, I identified as like pluralist, like, I'm here and there. And when I was in college, like around 20, I had this awareness that while I'm still picking up things from various sources and places and teachings, that I really do align with Islam. Yet there was this resistance to identifying as a Muslim. And through some time, I came to realize I didn't want to identify as a Muslim because of some people who are terrorists are Muslims. And then people who aren't Muslims say all Muslims are terrorists. And when I had that awareness, it became really clear to me, like, fuck that shit. I don't want to not do something because of what other people are and aren't doing. Like, if you don't understand what Islam is, that's your shit to hold. If my relationship with Islam, my understanding of Islam was very clear to me.
Mm.
And with that awareness, that's what made it very just easy for me to identify as Muslim. And that same sort of process, that understanding has carried over to DEI, to woke, to liberal. Like, even people who identify as liberal, they might do things and like that's not really liberal. Again, that's the wrong word for the thing you mean, but that doesn't mean I'm going to stop referring to myself as liberal. Same thing with woke. The fact that now woke can be a bad thing. Like, please don't wokeify that thing. No, ma'am, please, let's woke it all the fuck up. Like, I love being woke because for me, it means to be awake, to be aware, to be able to hold different things, to constantly be challenging preconceived notions, including my own.
So this is where I agree with you, and this is why I want to have this conversation so we can go into some of these things that, since we were with them, especially when they were fringe, I think that the kind of through line between you and I with both of these things or many of these things we're discussing, is we were really in it when it was fringe. There was no reward for being in it. It was the way of life. It felt very sacred. It felt very personal. And then somehow the reason why I use the word appropriated is it exploded and became like a trend and something people were jumping on, but didn't really understand the cultural roots and had different definitions for it than I did. And it's interesting because I used to joke about, I would call myself the queer Rip Van Winkle, because I was like, did I fall asleep under some damn rainbow tree and like sleep for 20 years and no one gave me the memo that this now means this and this now means this? And I never consented to changing what I meant by something, but a whole generation did. Now that's okay. I think for me is I don't really care what someone calls something, like have fun with it. I think where it bothers me now that I'm speaking to you is it bothers me because I can feel the residue of where I clenched from fawning, where I didn't want to really share how I felt about something because I didn't want to be cast out, or I didn't want to be labeled as something I'm not. And so there was that place of, well, I can control how people feel about me by going along with this thing and not speaking, like, Africa Brooks' work on self-censorship.
Yeah.
So I think I'm in this place now in the last 3 years where it feels so good just to say, this is actually how I feel, because I don't care anymore about being canceled or people not liking me. I'm getting where you are, where it's like, okay, I'm going to use this word a certain way, what it means to me. you might misinterpret that. And if you do, we have a chance to learn that together, or we just
Right.
parallel walk by each other, right?
Mhm.
And so I guess I say all that to say this is where decolonizing comes in. Shall we begin there?
Let's do that.
That's a little spice we want to start the soup with, some decolonizing spice. Decolonizing for me is such a powerful practice.
Yeah.
And it started when I was 13 by accident. I lived in rural Pennsylvania. There was no one knew these things. Are you kidding me? No one's talking about decolonizing. And I come from a family where all the identities are all over the place. Like my Puerto Rican side would always say you're Spanish Indian. I was like Spanish Indian, and my last name is Mojica. So I thought I was Mohican, right? Like that's just as a 5-year-old,
The
that's what you put
connection.
together.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what you put together. And so everywhere I went, in elementary school, oh, are you the last of the Mohicas? Well, funny enough, I actually am now. I'm like the last Mohica of my lineage. But they'd be like, oh, you're the last Mohican. They'd be like howl and all these things around me. And it was interesting because I really identify with Native Americans. I would see pictures of them. I would collect photos. I would collect their talismans. I was just really embedded in them as an identity
Mhm.
because my grandfather always said, like, you're Spanish and you're Indian. And then it would only be a couple years ago, 5 years, yeah, 5 years ago, that I would learn that, we were Taino. And so
Mhm.
that's what he meant when he said Indian. He meant Taino. And then it is Spanish. Spanish and Tainos came together. That's what makes it Puerto Rican, like
Mhm.
Europeans with Caribbean indigenous people. So I'm saying this because coming from that family already not understanding identity and where I fit in, not really understanding, well, why is my skin white, but they're brown? Like I'm not, but no one talking about it either. My
Yeah.
family was not racialized. They didn't speak about race. They just spoke about like culture essentially. I got this book when I was 13 it said Wicca, the Solitary Practitioner's Guide. And it's essentially all these indigenous practices of the Celts, the Celtic people, which is one part of my family. They're Irish. And 2 or 3 generations removed, they were witches. So it's this interesting thing as I read this book and then started reading other ones, it was starting to, connect my bones back to this indigenous Ireland. And it felt
Mhm.
so beautiful. And I was doing these practices and I was chanting and I was connecting to the moon, the sun. And I didn't know what I was doing is what Asha Frost calls re-indigenizing,
Yeah.
which is her word for decolonizing. Because
Mhm.
she says if you just say decolonize, you're still centering colonization. What do you do
Right.
when you decolonize? You have to re-indigenize that. So I thought, I'm re-indigenizing, looking back on it. All this to say that was my practice up until the moment you heard me talking about decolonizing your body through somatics, and that's what like hooked you to look at more stuff. And then something happened, and I don't know what it was, but all my teachers around decolonization, uh, they taught it specifically through a very, how do I want to say this? It was through an indigenous and a somatic lens. It wasn't a racialized narrative. That was part of
Okay.
it, right? And I say that was part of it because the whole understanding, and this is how I've heard elders talk about it, every person has a colonizer and every person has an indigenous person inside of them.
Mhm.
And so there's this potential for either to unlock. And that's how Amber McZeal taught it to me as well. So when I actually got the term decolonizing, I learned that's what I've been doing all these years. I was really, I guess for me, it was very much about how do I relate to land? How do I relate to body? How do I relate to other? And then when I started going to decolonizing circles and groups and webinars, all it was about was white people being oppressors and black people being oppressed.
Mhm.
And it distilled it down to me in a way that I didn't find to be useful because no one was talking about land. No one was talking about herbs. No one was talking about connecting to the forest. No one was talking about sun and moon cycles. It just became this very Americanized, racialized narrative. Understandably, like I understand where the intersections are there, but it got so tight and tense. Then the fights would break out between people who were white presenting, but they identified as mixed. It just
Mhm.
came into this place where we're losing the narrative here, which is anyone can become a colonizer. And right now it's happening in this room. You're all oppressing each other with your identities toward each other in the way that's dominant, that's not relational. And then I started being, reminded that colonization has been everywhere. Every corner of the world, every shade of person has colonized a person, different ways, of course. But the most recent that we're so familiar with is the European colonization of the
Yeah.
Americas. But I'm saying all that out loud because for me, when I say decolonize, that's not me raising a flag about that one small American narrative. It's this much bigger, like more than human picture.
Mhm.
And I wonder where that lands in you because you brought this up before we started on the recording.
Really? Yeah. So for me, when I say to decolonize or to colonize. It's very simple. And, I'm big on definitions, but for me, definitions are also very simple. To colonize means to be in domination of, to decolonize means to be in relationship with. So that could be a person, a land, myself, whatever it is. So if someone's using that in a very, very myopic and nuanced way, like you said, that might be a point where I want to say, like, hey, friend, yes, that is an example of colonization. But what about this other example? In fact, I think I'm witnessing a form of colonization in this room right now, in this respect, where it doesn't feel like we're in relationship. It feels like we're in domination with each other. And then that person might say, that's bullshit. Colonization is XYZ. And then I get to say, oh, you can be misinformed and miseducated. And then I go on about my business.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what I'm learning now is I don't want when I think of marketing, like marketing to me is I'm just communicating something. We teach this to our practitioners in our mentor group. When you market, you're just clearly communicating your service.
Mhm.
And part of it for me is when a word becomes a hashtag. And
Yeah.
if I say something in my marketing, like we're going to decolonize our bodies, I have found that at times I've attracted people that have a very, what I would say, lacking nuance view of colonization.
Mhm.
Uh, and I don't want to attract that anymore. And so I'm playing with how do I speak this thing from my heart that feels sacred to me, right? Without signaling a completely different set of ethics or practices that oppose what I actually mean by the term.
That's interesting. I don't really put a lot of energy into that
Tell me.
because I don't know. It feels like first, it just feels like a lot of work, like trying to anticipate people not coming on in like with the wrong perception. Like if anything, I kind of like the idea of maybe I track someone with a very specific idea of what decolonization means, and then they're exposed to, well,
Mm.
this is actually how I choose to use the term, and then maybe their minds are kind of blown.
Has that happened
Um,
to you actually?
that is
Was
kind
that the
of,
experience?
yeah.
Can you
Um,
tell me again? This
Absolutely. So
this
there are a
wild.
couple of things like in that one webinar. I think we've talked about the bug.
Oh, we
But
talked
the
about the
other
bug.
part, the other part was you're talking about decolonization. Talking about like it's sort of like in a way initially, like I'm like, oh, I totally know what decolonization is. We're trying to undo forces of oppression. I've been oppressed my whole life. I know as a woman, a Muslim, a Black person, I know about colonization. Let's get to some good stuff. And then you just kind of gently put in there, maybe like specifically as it related to food or maybe somatics in general, but just planting the seed of, and it's really important that we begin to realize how we colonize ourselves. And that was really mind blowing for me. It can seem really simple, but absolutely, the external forces of colonization are very real. I'm aware of them, I experience them. But the fact is, I have a lot of agency over the way I choose to colonize myself. Specifically, what are the ways I choose to dominate myself? Have I been trying to dominate my body for almost 40 years? And what would it mean for me to be in relationship with my body? So outside of forms of other forces of oppression and marginalization and colonization, which again are real, I still now get to be with the question: what are the ways I try to dominate myself?
Mhm.
And then out of that, what are the ways that I do dominate other people as well? But really coming back to the idea that it's not just sort of these amorphous concepts that are outside of ourselves, but the everyday actions that we take,
Mhm.
not just towards other people, but towards ourselves.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it gives me joy, right? To think just how you said that someone could be led thinking they're on the same page as me because of a word I'm using. And then I use it differently and it either expands them or pisses them off. I mean, you've
Mhm.
seen me piss plenty of people off.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's not like that's going to stop anytime soon. But it's interesting because I think I said this to you in membership and this might have been what prompted this conversation last week. I have this thing in me. It must be a trauma response because it feels very reflexive where when something really sacred to me gets really big, I'm like, nope. I'm not calling it that anymore. It's like,
Yeah.
this thing comes out of me. And I want to play with that more. I want to see what it's like to let myself even ride the wave of everyone finally being on the same page with the term and
Mhm.
see who comes in to maybe learn what it means to me instead of take myself out of that.
Yeah, and I mean, I personally like doing that because
Yeah,
when it is a form of like an appropriation, a trend, it's like the buzzword. The thing with trends and buzzwords is that they fall. Like we're seeing it with DEI right now. There is the what people are referring to the backlash. I personally don't think it's a backlash. It's just that it was a trend. It was a hot thing.
agreed.
People, organizations weren't really invested in it, and now it's not a hot thing. And so what you're seeing are the people who weren't really invested in it are fluttering
Mhm.
away. And so now you're kind of back on the fringe. So I
Mhm.
think, if I had to hypothesize, there's like you were saying, there's this value for you on being on the fringe. And then when it feels like it's not, when it feels like it's mainstream, you're like, oh, gross, no. But I like to ride that wave knowing that this ain't gonna last. Y'all ain't here for real. This ain't your thing. And then when it settles down, we'll come back to our core, to our fringe.
Well, you're really my cashing it in coach. Like you are my cashing it in coach. Because you said to me before, you're like, they want to hire me because I'm black. Fuck, I'll take their money. Like,
Oh yeah.
you're just like, I don't care why you want to hire me. Like, I'm going to use this opportunity to fund my family and my security. And I actually love that about you because I have this story of, I don't think it's like a high ground, but I have this story of like, nope, I don't want your money unless you're really in this with me.
Yeah.
And I
Mhm.
wonder what that's about. Like, what's it about for you to do the opposite? Where does that come from?
Um, I don't know. So when I was in as a DEI manager in the corporate space, I think part of the pitfalls of being a DEI manager in the corporate space, and part of the reason so many people burn out, is that you're fundamentally responsible for other people changing their actions. That would be your KPI, your key performance indicator. If managers now got higher performance on their inclusion surveys, if the recruitment team was now recruiting more diverse folks, but I can't do that for other people, but I'm being held responsible for other people's actions. And so that's stupid. Like I can't, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna, I don't want to work in a place where I'm being held responsible for other people's actions. And I'm not going to impose that upon myself. So I'll come in. I sort of began to take like the mindset that, I don't know why this stuck out for me, but in particular, like marriage counselors took
Mhm.
in terms of, I'm
Mhm.
going to be here to support you in terms of opening up communication. But what you all do with it is up to you. And success isn't necessarily that you stayed married. It might be that you end up dissolving there was something I was reading around how marriage counselors approach their work that I was like, yeah, like that's what I want to do. So that's the approach I take. Like you want to bring me in? Absolutely. I'm going to share my offering, my gifts with you. I'm going to hopefully maybe spark some ideas. And what you choose to do with that is then up to you. I can't do it for you. I can't
Mhm.
want it for you.
So then at this place with the quote DEI backlash, or really like you and I are seeing the cultural trend waning. 'Cause
Mhm.
all trends wane.
Yep.
Because trends usually aren't rooted. It's like something you're picking up, you're trying it on, you're like, everyone's saying how cool I look with it on, and then you grow out of
Yes.
it to the next trend. So you're still in the roots of where you began with this. You feel like for you, nothing's really changed because you're still living this, doing it just as you always would. Is there any rub in you when you see like a massive mainstream narrative that doesn't get DEI because people mishandled it? Is there any rub, or you just like don't care?
I mean, there's definitely a rub. Like the place I always go back to is that's the wrong word for the thing you mean. When I
Yeah.
hear
Yep.
people either as DEI practitioners explaining something, I'm like, oh, that's not the way I would do it. I personally don't think that's actually inclusive. The manner in which you're teaching it. If I see a DEI practitioner in the midst of a trauma response, again, kind of like that's not. You're not helping things
Mhm.
by bringing that into space. There's the rub. Similarly, I have a rub when I hear people talk about DEI just in a completely ignorant way. I mean, even just most recently, President of the United States says the issue with the DC plane crash, DEI hires. Like, no,
They
it's
said that
not.
about the
And
bridge
so,
too.
like,
Remember that? Yeah.
Yeah, same thing like with the wildfires. The reason it wasn't an effective and efficient response. Too many DEI hires. No, it's not. But there's nothing like I can't force you, but
Mhm.
you're speaking untruths. You're speaking ignorance. And again, I can have some curiosity and understanding about
Mhm.
where that comes from in both cases.
It's funny that it's the way you experience that example, that's how I experienced the whole transgender example. It's the
Mm,
same thing for me. When I see, and especially now with legislation, when I see this piece about when I constantly see people conflate gender with sex, it like
mhm,
drives me crazy. And it's probably because of, how I grew up and what I went through, and this sense of I have this sense of advocacy for transsexuals, and it's very different for transgender. And so
mhm.
there's this whole point in history where everything changed, even in the medical literature. It went from understanding that sex dysphoria and transsexualism is over here, gender dysphoria and transgender is over here. And what made them very different was one required hormones and surgery to function, one didn't. So gender was essentially, and this is how I was raised by, queer trans drag queens, is they didn't raise me, but as I was growing
Yeah.
up, these were my good friends and mentors. And so I really understood there's a big difference. And the difference was really important in advocacy for transsexuals because someone that's gender expansive is essentially someone that's playing with fashion, which can sound like really harsh, but it's
Yeah.
that's where I come from in understanding it. Like think of Boy George, perfect example.
Mm,
That's a gender nonconforming man. So he's not against his birth sex whatsoever. He has no sex dysphoria,
yeah.
but he might have gender dysphoria. He might think, why can't I wear lipstick? Like I feel really oppressed. I'm not wearing lipstick. Or why can't I wear heels to the supermarket without getting yelled at or something thrown at me? That would be
Yeah.
his gender dysphoria. But he doesn't require transition. He
Yeah.
just wants to free himself and be whatever he wants to be, right? In terms of expression. And I find it so important to get that difference across to people
Me
because
too.
when that difference is not understood, you actually start appropriating the transsexual experience without even trying.
Mhm.
And you conflate being misgendered as the same thing as sex dysphoria, and they couldn't be further from the same thing.
Yeah.
And then you get to a place where it becomes a mainstream political conversation for the first time in my lifetime at the level it is now. And I think besides actual transphobia that now has, let's say, a purpose to emerge, there's a lot of misunderstanding that has led to this. And I think a big part of it is bringing children into the mix, what I talked about publicly a lot. I
Yeah.
think most kids are gender dysphoric, not sex dysphoric. And again, these things being conflated made parents actually believe because my boy wants to wear a dress, we have to talk about possible puberty blockers and such. But
Mhm.
they're two different paths. Sometimes that's true, but it's not all the time. But then my friends who are licensed therapists, they can lose their license if they even question a dysphoric child at the point we're at now because of certain legislation from the
Mm.
last administration. But anyway, all this is for me to say there's been a conflation of sex and gender that has confused gender dysphoric people and not advocated for transsexuals. And I'm always kind of like, can we just open that up a little bit? And so when I talk about trans, I'm usually thinking of transsexuals. I'm not thinking of I don't put gender nonconforming people in the same umbrella as transsexuals. I think the
Okay.
umbrella isn't useful. It's like my POC thing. It's like
Mhm.
I don't think the umbrella for trans is useful for gender nonconforming individuals. So that's where my rub is too. But then at the same time, I think I am a true liberal, which sounds so fucking egoic to say. Christ
I
almighty.
know.
Can you say it too so I'm not alone?
I do. I know. It does sound really
It's so egoic. It is so egoic. But it's like, and I'm saying this in the sense of like, do what you want. Like, I really, really respect culture. And if
yeah.
there's a family that has a culture where that's their culture, like, fucking go for it. But I'm not going to pretend I agree with you.
Right. And that idea of like I'm not going to go for it, but I'm not going to pretend I agree with you. That's sort of where I am, like
Hmm.
where I don't have the rub. Like
Hmm.
I'm not going to agree that I think either that's the approach to DEI or that's what I would consider to be woke or liberal. But I'm not also I don't feel a need to either educate you, try to convince you to show up as I do. In the same way, I don't feel an urgency to completely distance myself from you. Again, like sort of going to my
Yes.
experience, like when I was 20, there was this urgency around like, oh, I can't be associated with Muslims because there are some Muslim terrorists and there are some people who say that all Muslims are terrorists. That I don't like in my body. If I feel like that sort of thing, like, oh, I can't be associated with you because of all of this going on, that's something for me to sit with because there comes it's more
Mm.
about something in me rather than what they're doing.
Even when you say that, I get this like softness in my chest and belly
Yeah.
because I'm with you on that. It's like I can truly connect to anybody. Like
Yeah.
I remember when I was in, well, God, when was it? When was 9/11? We were in ninth grade, but we were around the same. Were you ninth
I'm
grade,
older than
Tim?
you. I was in 11th grade.
You were 11th. Okay, I was in ninth grade. I always think we're the same age. Um, but I remember it happening, and I remember, for years after that, the backlash against Muslims,
Yeah.
especially in the town I lived in, where there were very few to begin with. Um, and it sounds so inappropriate to say, I thought the Taliban were hot. Like,
That's going to be the thing that gets us canceled, by the way.
like but like, there's something inherent to that to me. Okay, because like here I am watching these images of these like gorgeous men in headdresses with these beautiful eyes, like in the desert, obviously not agreeing with what they're doing by any means or how they treat women or gay men, like at all. But this is the thing about being multidimensional. It's like, this is
Hold
parts
both
work.
truths,
Yes, I'm like, well, okay, I can see their hotness while at the same time wanting nothing to do with
their
that.
actions. Yes.
Wait, what'd you say? What'd you say?
I can hold their hotness while also completely opposing their actions.
Yes. And
Yeah.
so to me it's the same thing. It's like I can hold your innocent appropriation of trans, let's say,
Mhm.
without hating you and
Yeah.
without never wanting to have dinner with you and without,
Mhm.
dehumanizing you. And I think that's where this all comes for me as we're talking about this more, is it's so hard for me to dehumanize somebody.
Yeah.
Right. That's why I could find them hot. That's why I can like still hang out with someone that we are completely on opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to gender theory. But I fucking love you. And
Mhm.
I want to be around you. And I think you're an excellent person. And I
Yeah.
guess as we're as we're talking about this, there's a lot more freedom opening up because I'm like, well, I'll use my words however I want to. And if I attract someone that is projecting what they think that means onto me, they get an opportunity to have the me that they see die, right? And then actually meet me. And if
Mhm.
they want to actually meet me, great. And if they wanted that version of me, I mean, they can find that version anywhere. That there's plenty of people that believe in what they believe in.
Yeah.
And so there's a real freedom to that, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean, I do. Like as you were sharing that example, it actually made me think of just like I can look at folks and say like, oh, to me, that's not really Islam. Let me be very clear. There are a lot of people who look at me, it's like, no, that's not being a Muslim. This is what being a Muslim is. And
I mean, fellow Muslims say this to you, or you're
yeah,
saying,
yeah,
okay, got
I've
it.
been in conversations like for example, like I might be talking to somebody and they'll say, "Oh, sister, you're not Muslim, you're Sufi," and then like for me, that's a part. I don't identify as Sufi, but it is a part
Yeah.
of Islam, one of the sects. But or like because of the way I dress or how I cover my hair, and it's not just with me. Within Islam, it can be if you don't cover your hair a certain way, people can perceive you as being less Muslim, or if you don't speak Arabic. But it's just interesting there are folks who, just like in any sphere, who have sort of this ability to hold, like, oh, this is how this concept, in this case, Islam, manifests for you. And that is interesting to witness and hear how it manifests for me. Where there are those who say, like, I'm doing it this way because this is the right way. I don't know what you're doing, but that's not it. And
Yeah.
so I do think that there is that balance. Like, yeah, there's that part of me that says, like, no, that's the wrong word for the thing you mean. But like you said, doesn't mean I can't hate you. Doesn't mean I can't still have a conversation with you. Doesn't mean I can't hear like what brought you to where you are. But in that, it's still not going to stop me from identifying the way that I do.
I think you just mistakenly said, doesn't mean I can't hate you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Which is also true, but you're saying it doesn't mean I have to hate you. Yeah.
Yes. Mhm.
Yeah, I knew what you meant. Yeah, I appreciate that. I often wonder that with you because,
Mhm.
and I'll be clear and you tell me if it's offensive or not.
Yeah.
But there's a very different thing from who I've met and what I've watched and listened to of American Muslims
Yeah.
and Muslims that are in the Middle East,
Mm,
particularly around women's rights and homosexuality. And I'm really curious how you hold that because you're
yeah.
such an advocate for homosexuals, for women. Like, how do you hold that as a Muslim woman when predominantly it is, a lot of aspects of that religion, for whatever reason, are against those things? Can you explain that to me?
Yeah. So for me, I find that to your point, oftentimes, not just with Islam, but with lots of religions, there is the religious, the spiritual teaching, and then there's the culture of the country. And oftentimes those are conflated. And we can overcouple or conflate the culture of the country with the religion itself, both as someone in the religion and someone outside of the religion.
Yep.
So for me, that's one part of it. And then two, I think even, and we're seeing this more now, even when you look at countries in West Asia, the Middle East, North Africa, there is a lot of diversity in terms of sexuality, gender identity, gender representation. And more of that is being empowered to be vocalized. And just like we've seen in other places throughout time, there have been voices have been oppressed, quieted. And you're seeing, for example, Middle Eastern or West Asian women who might choose to wear a hijab and are screaming feminist, and I think that's really important to hold because one of the things, now I'm going off on a rant, but
Do it.
one of the
I'll
things,
follow
both
you.
as a Muslim woman and as a DEI practitioner, that I just found so puzzling over the last couple of years, there were a couple of countries that outlawed head wraps or wearing burqas or burkinis in the spirit of inclusion. And it was baffling to me because, again, I'm like, that's the wrong word for the thing you mean.
Mm-hmm.
Telling a woman that she can't wear a head wrap is just as fucked up as telling a woman that she has to wear a head wrap.
Yeah.
Inclusion is being able to hold space for a woman making a choice about how she does or does not want to cover her body. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. But
Well, I'll tell you where I'm going with it because I think this is why I love your the way that you break down the D, the E, and the I is it really resonates for me. And part of that is you are like really a radically inclusive person. You're like Daryl Davis inclusion, where it's like people who completely disagree with me, as long as I'm physically safe and they're not being, like directly, not even rude, but directly harmful or
yeah, harmful. Yeah.
harmful. Why would I exclude them, from the conversation or even sharing
Mhm.
space? And I think to me that's the real value of inclusion, and where a lot of people, in my opinion as well, went wrong with it in the last couple of years is thinking that inclusion is just about getting people who agree with you and including that at the
Yeah.
table. And it's
Yes.
like, well, that's what made it so stale. And I think if there's ever going to be a backlash against anything, it's things like that getting really stale and not being relational, because it's
Yes.
not
I
relational to
agree.
do that.
I agree.
It's
Go
dominating.
back to colonization and decolonization. It actually became a form of colonization where it wasn't relational. It's about dominance. If it comes down to consensus and a list of rules, that is not inclusion. In fact, I even had to do like an IG post where it was just like, this is what DEI is. This is what it's not. If it is
Right, right.
if it's a list of rules to follow, that's not inclusion.
And that's amazing to hear because the mainstream DEI is exactly that. It's
Mhm.
a list of, I mean, you and I have been in spaces with people who have come to us in confidence, in privacy and been like, hey, I need to let you know our company's doing this thing. And then I hear what they're doing and I'm like, what? Like what they're calling that DEI? It's interesting because it literally becomes a strange neo-colonization through the Trojan horse of DEI, if you will.
It
And
does.
without even
Yeah.
realizing it, it's very innocent. It's like they think they're doing good and they're actually creating more division.
They are. And now, again, another rant that happens when you don't want to offer it the space and time that it needs. Like, there is one thing to come into an organization, talk about, like you were saying, the difference between sex, gender expression, sexuality, or sexual orientation. Why you might want to include your pronouns next to your name. How does that support someone versus company mandate, everybody has to put their pronouns next to their names.
That's right.
Those are two very different situations.
Very different. Well, the first one, and this is why I would call you an old school real liberal, a real liberal, the real deal. The first one is like, I'm going to give you the information. I trust you to do what you want with it, right? That's literally the opposite of dictatorship
Mhm.
versus here's the information. You must comply or you're a bigot or you're
Yeah.
whatever.
Or not even the information. I'm not even going to tell you why.
Okay, even worse.
You just got to put your
Here's the
pronouns next
rules.
to your name. Just do it. Company mandate.
You're right. And I think it's why I love that you call it fast food DEI, because I
Mhm.
can call fast food liberal, fast food woke, fast food decolonization,
Mhm.
fast food queerness, fast food witch. It's like there's no
Yeah.
roots, there's no time, and the body isn't there. Here's the somatic piece, right?
There it
It's
is. Yeah, that's the
ideology,
somatic
isn't it?
piece. The body is not there. It is
I
completely
just got that.
dissociative. It's just like when we talk about the nutrition. Like, could we give you a list of do's and don'ts? Eat
Yes,
this, don't do that. We could, but that's just dissociative.
that's
And
right.
that's what most places are doing. You know, to plug your book. You're
What
It's
was that?
about coming
Say
into
it loud.
relationship with the body and what happens when I put this food into my body? Does it serve me? Do I have capacity for its impact right now? And people do get frustrated with us. Why? Because there's a level of discernment. There is work and space and time on your part to come into relationship with your body and your food choices.
Mm. Yeah, I love that we're saying this in this way and that you said it that way. And the fast food piece really hits because this is what drove me into somatic psychology was
Mm,
10 years of nutrition private practice and what 4 or 5 of those years clinical setting in urban neighborhoods and areas where I had like 1,000 people a week coming in, 10, 15 minutes and like at a vitamin counter and have to help them and from every condition you can imagine. And what I learned is a really small handful, a tiny handful of people they take what you prescribe. They never ask questions. They heal. But I mean, those are like the rare ones, a couple
mm,
people a year. Everyone else, they would take the guidelines and they would maybe couple weeks, couple months if they were lucky, bounce right back. And this kept hitting me where I would see people literally curing cancer and then bouncing right back to whatever they were doing and getting cancer or something else again. And that's why I thought there has to be something underneath this. There has to be something deeper that needs more time and space. And it's what you just said. And that's why I love the marriage of somatics and nutrition. I don't know how they couldn't be married in the first place. Like, what's more somatic than eating, Camille?
mm.
Like, I mean, it's like literally going into your body takes care of all of it for you. You don't think
Yeah.
about it all. And so understanding that piece it went from fast food nutrition, which I was literally doing, right, to something much more embodied, something that took years for people to learn instead of just like 2 sessions with me.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
a whole culture change, not a strategy, like as Resma would
Mhm.
say, a whole culture change.
Yeah. Now, and I really appreciate that example because that's an example where you didn't necessarily feel you didn't have to give up the title nutritionist. It was somatic nutritionist, but you
Hey,
didn't have to walk away from the term nutritionist, even though there are a lot of other people who are nutritionists but are approaching it totally differently than you would.
well, I have a couple more things before we close.
Yeah.
Bitch. Can we talk about bitch?
Let's talk about bitch.
Can we
Yeah.
talk about bitch? So I've offended a couple people because I'm assuming it's a couple people. I only got one complaint, but I ended a newsletter with the word bitch. It
Yes.
was like I'm blood and bones, comma, bitch. And I was saying to you that I'm so used to being in gay spaces where it's like, I mean, you throw bitch around left and right. Like, hey bitch, give me the broccoli. Hey bitch,
Mhm.
turn on the car. Hey bitch, go. I love you, bitch. And so I forget how this word like really can land in a woman's body who's been abused or had any misogyny in her life. And so let's kind of flip the script because this is a similar example of me speaking something that's just I'm so used to speaking, maybe to a broader audience, which is not the appropriate place to do it. How is this self-censoring? How is this measuring self to respect people? Where would you go with that?
Oh, so, oh gosh. Well, for me, I find the HLN newsletter to be very it's you. I mean, it's you. It's
I am
who you
writing it.
are.
Yeah.
It's your personality. I was going to say like on a sheet of paper, but like on the computer screen. And so, for me, that's very personal. Like that's just that's how you talk. And if anything, if someone doesn't like it, great, unsubscribe because then that just means that you're not meant to be in relationship with one another. Like when you were telling me about that example, it actually brought up for me the experience I've had with some people, because I close my email with "May peace be with you,"
Yes.
and that has offended some people. That I don't want you throwing religion in my face. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
um,
You throwing that religion in people's face
and
like a
I was like,
pie,
okay,
like
well
a
then
pie,
don't email me.
like
That
Mark Summers with that.
that's where I am.
You're
Even
Mark
if
Summers with that whipped cream pie. What was that
it's
show?
right there. Yes. What would you do?
What
Yeah.
did you do? Yeah.
Oh, and so for me, I don't feel the need. I don't feel the need to censor that part. Again, that sort of takes me back to like a really constrictive
Mm.
thing. To me, there's a big difference between saying like "May peace be with you" and saying like, "So have you found God?" There's a distinction there where one is an expression of who I am, whereas the other is a mandate on how you have to show up. And if the
Mm.
expression of who I am
Mm.
is not in an alignment with you, you find it a boundary violation, by all means, follow that boundary. You are not meant to be in relationship with me in this way.
I just wrote down mandate with how you have to show up.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good one. Here, this is why you're the real liberal. The real a liberal. This is good because even when you say about me it being in my tone when I'm writing,
Mm,
that's why I say bitch. Because
yeah,
like that's how I talk to myself, Camille. Like this
right.
bitch walks through
Yes.
the forest, I'm like,
Mhm.
bitch, you did good today. It's like, but if I'm doing a demo with someone, I'm not like, bitch, where do you feel that in your
Yes,
chest?
exactly.
That'd be so inappropriate. Like that would never come out that way. So I think it's interesting that you bring that in because that gives me some context of like why I trigger people in my newsletter sometimes
Yes.
because I'm really speaking how I'd speak to myself or like my best friend.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No,
You don't like how I speak to myself or my best friend.
and- but again, for me, that's important to have awareness of. Yes, I have a market research background, so I know understand the benefits of like trying to reach everybody and not
Yeah,
offend
yeah.
anyone. But also from a market research background, when you try to reach everyone, you end up not attracting anyone because you just become this bland
Yes.
white sheet of paper that doesn't really have a personality. And so to actually have a brand identity, the fact is some people aren't going to identify with that or aren't going to align with that. And that's great because now you're able to
Yeah, it's great.
really hone in on those who jive with what you're putting out there, who saw that closing, just like, yes, you spoke to me. Like I'm picking up what you're throwing down. And then you get to further invest in that relationship as opposed to trying to be everything to everyone.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, this whole conversation, this is what it's really about, isn't it? It's what's my capacity to have difference.
Mm,
Because if I'm using decolonization and I'm attracting like 100 people who disagree with me, well, if I have the capacity for that, what does it matter?
yeah.
I'll be true to myself and speak what I believe versus expect a certain outcome and then try to prevent that in this present moment.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and this is kind of like one of my final things is which. And I'll
Yeah.
tell you
Tell me
though,
about that. Yes, I know that's
it's
been a
not.
journey for you. I was curious to hear that. I didn't know that was going to be on the list.
Yeah, well, they made the list, top three, and it's not witch, it's witchy.
Oh,
If someone says the word witchy, I'm not kidding. It is synonymous with an old dirty diaper, Camille. Like that's how it feels. That's how it feels to me. No offense, to all you use the word witchy. It's okay, but I'm like witchy, witchy. There's
witchy.
some there's something so like commodified, but like I'm witchy, and then I get really shady, and I'm like, just because you light a candle called Starry Night from Yankee does not make you a witch. It goes way deeper than that.
Do it. Do it. I love it. Like when appropriation happens, like, gosh, I'm going all over the place with this. But
Do it. Do it.
so a couple of years ago, maybe like 10 years ago, it became like a fad. It was a trend for everyone to start saying, bye, Felicia, bye, Felicia, bye,
Yes,
Felicia.
yes.
Now, that comes from a very specific scene from a specific movie from 1995. But
What's the
yet in
movie?
like 2015, it became a thing. So from the movie Friday.
I never saw it.
Um, and so when people started saying it, it started to piss me off because I was just like, I know you've never seen that movie. And then I got to a point where people started to say it. Then I was like, do you know where that comes from? I'm like, what do you mean? What you just said? I'm like, what are you talking? I mean, by Felicia. Do you know where that comes from? Do you know the movie it comes from?
Like people always said it. What do
They
you
would
mean?
say no. Like, oh, okay. And so I'm not there to tell them, or
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just, my question was like, do you even know why you're saying that?
But there's a little shade police coming in. I'm
Oh yeah,
feeling
it
it.
definitely is.
The
That's
shade
the
police
question.
have
Do you
arrived.
know the movie that comes from? You
That's
don't.
right.
Mm-mm. Okay.
That's where I go.
Yeah.
You're like, bye, Felicia.
Mhm.
Bye, Felicia. Like to your bye, Felicia, I say bye, Felicia.
Yeah.
You know, that's how it it's like, soul food.
Yes.
Like I told you, I was literally raised on that movie. I don't know why. I don't know why, but it was like it was my grandmother's like one of her favorite films, and we just watch it all the time. And so my whole childhood, I'd be laying down in bed, you know how you do, like thinking of movies, and I would just hear, "Faith fucked my husband," like over and over. The family fucked my husband, and it was this scene that was like, you felt so excited for her, like she finally
Such a
said
good
it.
scene.
It's such a good scene, and everyone hears it. And she grabs the knife. And you're like, "Yes, get him, bitch!" And so I'm just imagining if everyone started saying that.
Yes,
There was like,
it would be the exact same thing. You'd be so pissed off. You're like, you don't even know what movie that comes from. You don't know how
that's
iconic that
right.
scene truly is. You're just repeating something you've heard other people say.
I mean, I'm enjoying this episode because this lets us just go super low
So
vibe.
many ways. So
We get to be
random.
low vibe. We get to teach. We get to bitch. We get to co-regulate, co-dysregulate. I think it's good that people can win this the many layers this has. Is there anything else you want to end with on your list? Anything you didn't get to squeeze out?
Um. Oh, I guess I might give some more context around like why liberal. Oh, because
Yeah, do it.
we
I was thinking
referencing
that. I was
quite
thinking
a
of that
bit.
word.
So I will say for me, part of the reason I began to identify as liberal versus conservative wasn't because of a particular set of beliefs, but for me, um, and not that I necessarily identify as Democrat, but I often hear the Democrats referred to as like the big tent party. And so when I think of liberal, when I think of big tent, it was this idea of being able to house many different ideas, experiences, as opposed to only holding a certain number. And so particularly over the last few years, I have seen places that I originally perceived as being liberal actually espousing very conservative actions, because they're not able to hold different perspectives. They're not able to hold different experiences. It has to be a very particular set. And so for me, liberal is literally liberal. It's being able to hold a lot, and conservative is being able to hold a little amount.
It's interesting because if we do that through thematic lens, we're talking about expansion and contraction.
Yeah.
And as I always teach, like you need both to function. I think like this, I think there's an amazing mix in a country that can actually pendulate between both in like a sane way, not an oppositional way or like a fighting the other way, but like, oh, let me learn from the traditionalism of contraction so that I can expand. And then if I expand too much, let me contract a little. Like that'd be a great way we could, meet in the middle. But I'm with you. That's what really attracted me to liberalism as well. Was, oh wow, there's like all these ideas that get to be under one ceiling together. We get to be really diverse, and we get to argue, and we get to like have different opinions, but we're still all liberals. And I thought it was so fun. And then as well in the last few years, I noticed this weird homogenization of liberal means you have to agree with this one set of rules. And I thought, that doesn't sound very liberal to me. This is something else.
Wrong word for the thing you mean.
Wrong word for the. It's very saying. Do you know what liberal means?
Yeah.
Put that shade.
You know,
please.
like yeah, literally. What's the definition? You tell
What's
me.
the definition? Well, this was fun. We have a very captive audience, meaning held captive, listening to us saying this stuff. So I can't wait to hear what they think. But anything else you want to close with, love?
No, I really like this. This was fun. I hope it sparked something for folks. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Camille and I have had like not 1,000, maybe 200, 300 conversations like this over the phone so many times. And so I was like, let's just record one. Let's just record one. So I'm glad we did.
Me too.
Okay, everybody. We'll see you next time. That's the end of today's episode. Now let's take a moment to notice where we feel the episode in our bodies. Close your eyes. Take a breath. And let whatever wants to come up, come up. And remember, those sensations hold the wisdom that we're looking for. If you want to go deeper, visit holisticlifenavigation.com. Stress and trauma happen in the body, so we need to go inside the body in order to recover from it. I'm Luis Mojica, somatic therapist, nutritionist, and trauma educator. My 7-week course is going to teach you how to use nutrition, somatics, and embodied parts work in order to recover from stress and trauma. My virtual course is 100% live, taught by me and my team, and it's a lot like a retreat. Because we're not just teaching you things, we're interacting, we're practicing, we're engaging in sound healings, and we're there for you through one-on-one support throughout the entire 7 weeks. My team is a huge part of this support system to help make sure you are integrating and practicing this work and having all the support you need to get through the 7 weeks. Camille Leek is our community manager and co-teacher. Evan Glenn Adams is our resident sound healer, who will be doing a live sound healing every week. Marika Malaya is there for co-regulation, somatic practices, and support throughout the 7 weeks as well. Week 1 of my course is all about the biology of stress and trauma, meaning what's actually happening inside of you when you're feeling overwhelmed or anxious. Week 2 teaches you trauma-informed nutrition, which essentially means how food affects your adrenals, your blood sugar, and your nervous system, including your brain and your mood.
One of the things that was really profound came in week 2 with the shift in diet, not only in terms of noticing a real shift in my energy levels, but also in my gut health.
Week 3 helps you explore how your body experiences your relationships, the people around you, the places you go to, even where you live. Week 4 is integration week, which is a lovely week to spread out, settle in, and integrate everything you've learned from the prior 3 weeks. I'll host a Q&A session, an integration session, and a sound healing that week.
Being in community with people from all over the world feels incredibly beautiful during these divisive times.
These practices are very simple, and yet they seem to have a really profound effect.
Week 5 is the beginning of how you relate to yourself. How do your thoughts show up in your body? How do you relate to your thoughts and your ideas of yourself? This is a really important piece of embodied parts work, so you can learn how to hold these different parts in you instead of letting them rule you and your decisions.
If we hadn't worked with Luis, we would probably be on the verge of breaking up, or, we wouldn't be living together anymore. Yeah,
this video wouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
Week 6 is all about meaning making. What story do you tell based on experiences you've had? And what does your body expect is going to happen again? Week 7, our final week of the course, is all about activation. It's about your relationship to the big, inconvenient, even uncomfortable sensations that emerge due to life circumstances and past experiences.
Luis's ability to kind of lead students through the work in a safe space, earn trust, and oftentimes kind of reach a resolution on the spot. It's pretty incredible.
I hope you join us because we would love to support you in learning, practicing, and integrating this work into your life.
Getting there, it was just, I could tell something special was about to happen.
There's just something about in-person retreats that just doesn't compare to online space.
Minla is outstandingly beautiful. Why not be there with Luis and his team?
My body knew that something intense was going to happen in the most beautiful way.
It was all about getting what each and every one of us needed and what the community needed.
My biggest takeaway is that I got introduced to myself.
We're just a bunch of misfits trying to find community with one another, and that's where my heart just blasted open because I felt like seen, and yeah, it was beautiful. I loved it.
Imagine going to a therapist because you're feeling depressed or unmotivated or trying to recover from chronic stress and trauma. And instead of that therapist asking you questions about your mother or your childhood or any problems you're going through, they ask you one very important, overlooked question. What did you have for breakfast? My name is Luis Mojica, and I am that therapist. I'm a somatic therapist and nutritionist who uses food to help people recover from stress and trauma. Some people call me a trauma nutritionist. Others simply know me as that guy who loves beans. Why? there's a whole chapter in the book, and you can read all about it. I've taken over 20 years of experience in the field of somatic psychology and nutrition and put all of the information in one book called Food Therapy. Food therapy teaches people the very simple yet missing link between nutrition and stress response. In other words, the food we eat has the ability to increase or decrease the levels of stress hormones in our bodies, which have profound effects on our mental, emotional, and physical health. This is vital information for the everyday person looking for more balance in their lives, or individuals looking to recover from current stress or even past traumatic experiences. My approach is highly accessible because I focus on everyday foods that are easy to prepare and are affordable and help lower our stress levels. I've been teaching this work to tens of thousands of people in person and virtually all over the world since leaving my private practice in 2020. And what I've learned from meeting people from all backgrounds is food therapy resonates and is needed by everyone. I'm thrilled to have this book as a resource for so many people to lean on so they can learn how to navigate their lives and their healing through a trauma-informed nutritional lens.